solar is an absolute catastrophe in terms of being a reliable power source. As I say here, no matter how much you overbuild, you need catastrophic amounts of storage to handle real world conditions. That is, the sun disappearing every day, even in really sunny places, let alone places like New England or Europe where they're trying to do it. And also, solar can underperform, as we saw recently during Storm Fern. So it underperforms for a few days. So then you not only don't have the sun most of the time when it's just not available, but it's not available even when it is shining to provide a surplus to charge batteries. So it's not a reliable source of power. It can't reliably charge batteries. The only way to do this is you just have to build it over so many times, like 10 times or more. And then you need to build multi days of storage in most parts of the country. And then you start to approximate a self-sufficient system. So I think I explained this pretty clearly. I'll explain it more clearly this week. I have a more extended piece, but I feel like I made a pretty clear argument. And in particular, the solar plus storage thing just should not be promoted as any kind of replacement for fossil fuel power. What all this stuff is, as I've explained in other places, is it's intermittent fuel savings. So when the sun shines, you can then use your natural gas plant less, so you're burning less fuel. Now you also make the gas plant less efficient, so it's not you don't save all the fuel that you think you do, but you do save some fuel. But in exchange, you have to pay for the solar panels and the wind turbines and the battery. By the way, you have to replace those over time, and the transmission infrastructure. If you're not doing residential, and if you are doing residential, it costs 3 times as much, and then you also have distribution infrastructure for residential. So it's a mess, and most of the time, it's just not at all worth the fuel savings if you're talking about the economics of it, not even close. But sometimes it can be, and that's fine. So let's use it when it's actually a fuel saver. But don't treat it as a real power source, because to make it a real power source, it's just catastrophically expensive, and nobody actually does that. So real as in a self-sufficient power source. So let's see kind of the state of discourse in terms of people who've commented on this. So somebody says super hot geothermal is the future. I hope so. That would be great. At least that is a potentially reliable source. As I've written about, there's a lot of difficulties here. You're going really deep underground, difficult conditions, et cetera, et cetera. Hydro is great, location limited, and is still somewhat weather dependent, but much better in terms of reliable power source where you can do it, but you can't do it most places, and it doesn't scale enough. Now, this is talking about solar is cheap per kilowatt hour. This is all nonsense. You have to look at the full cost to actually provide reliable power 24/7, 365 to the grid. Solar is not reliable power, therefore it's just a fuel saver, so you can't treat it, you can't look at what it costs to generate a unit of solar, a kilowatt of solar, and then treat that as the cost of solar. The cost of solar is that kilowatt plus the life support, so it just always adds cost. It's not subtracting cost unless the fuel savings is worth it, which is rare. But in any case, it's not an alternative. It's just a fuel saver to the reliable power source. Okay, saying I misunderstand this. Yeah, but you're not understanding my point about wind is actually available most of the time and solar isn't. This is somebody promoting, I think, their own thing. Okay. Yeah, solar in space is great. It just has a lot of costs associated with it. But yeah, of course, if we had the conditions of space, then this would be a much different discussion. Yes, but you can have 24/7 solar space. Seems pretty hard to change GPUs when they evolve every year or 18 months in space, but if you want to do that on a free market, go for it. By the way, why is there all this propaganda for solar? Why don't they just succeed in a free market? But the dirty little secret is they have expiring subsidies. They're really upset about that. And they still have massive favoritism on the state level in terms of what are called RPS, Renewable Portfolio Standards, which are mandates. They have massive favors on the grid in terms of they get given what's called capacity value, even though they don't really provide reliable capacity. So a lot of this is just people are agitating for more government support slash favoritism for solar. That's why they're putting all this propaganda instead of just delivering a real product that can compete with fossil fuels, because they absolutely cannot do that. And then often, people like Chamath and Elon obviously just have huge investments in this stuff. Okay, so solar makes sense for peak shaving. This is a better kind of argument, but the issue with the peak is you really need to rely to be able to rely on it, and you can't even fully rely on solar during summer peaks. So that doesn't even quite work. Just the problem is it's so hard to deal with the with being a weather determined source of energy. So if you want to deal with peaks, a much better way to deal with peaks is just to have peaker plants or to use batteries. But the thing people don't get about batteries is batteries are good because they can be reliably charged by reliable power during off peak times. They're not associated in any way necessarily with solar and wind. They don't work that well with solar and wind in terms of reliability, but you can make them reliable, at least for some amount of time, if you have a reliable power source charging them off peak. And this is one thing Elon has advocated, and on this, he is right, that at least it is a way to increase capacity during peak times if you have a reliable power source charging it. But don't confuse that with solar, which is not a reliable power source. Okay, capacity factor is terrible. Yeah, that's true. But capacity factor doesn't really matter that much. The capacity factor is just what is its maximum potential, and then what percentage of that are you operating on? But it's a misleading thing because sometimes you have a lower capacity factor, like coal does often now, because it's just utilized less than it could be. The real question is what is your reliability or dispatchability? How on demand are you? As long as you're on demand, then there's just the question of how much does it cost to provide the electricity on demand in general and at specific times. I don't know what Drader means. It doesn't sound like a compliment. Yeah, seldom during peak demand. Well, solar sometimes during peak summer demand. Winter is a disaster. But I just want to make clear, I'm in favor of using solar or wind when it's an economic fuel saver. I'm just not in favor of pretending that it's a reliable power source. I agree with this Swedish writing. Okay, all these concerns go with a national power distribution grid. Really, how big is our nation that it's not dark throughout the nation? I didn't know that. So this is, and then also people have no idea of the cost of this. We're already paying so much money and having higher prices for transmission. Like it's really hard to do this stuff around the country. And by the way, if you look at Storm Fern, you had lulls. The storm can lead to lulls throughout the country. So we have two-thirds of the country with suppressed solar and wind at different kinds of times. That doesn't argue well for your national power distribution grid. Okay, when it's night in one. Okay, so now we have a global grid. So nobody is doing this, and when people are trying this, it's just so expensive. Yeah. So if you just ignore all cost, but then this is the same point I'm making about the storage and the overbuild. Yeah, you can theoretically do it. It's just so expensive, nobody would do it. So yeah, a global grid. So we're just going to connect halfway around the world so that it's when it's sunny in certain places and it's dark here, we can use their solar, and we're going to deal with that thick transmission and that distance of transmission. And I mean, come on. Okay, well, this is not an argument. Yeah, I would like to see what happens in 3 years. Okay, hydrogen fuel cells. Well, this is something where, yeah, it's nice if you can take the intermittent source and turn it into something reliable. But you have similar issues with hydrogen fuel as with batteries. Now, there's some nice things about hydrogen fuel in terms of you could, depending on how you're using it, you could accumulate it more than the battery, so you don't have to build all the capacity in advance. But right now, this is super expensive. And when the hydrogen subsidies disappeared, guess what? All these hydrogen projects disappeared. So more power to you in a free market. I would love to find a way to cheaply store intermittent energy, and in general, to cheaply use intermittent energy. So more power to you if you can figure it out. Okay, great. So asking like you're acting like I'm against the sun. I mean, come on. Yes, obviously, yes, fossil fuels are really good solar energy. I'm advocating against subsidizing and mandating the form that uses sunlight that disappears all the time, or at least pretending that it is reliable. Okay, I'm not sure what the truck thing means. Okay, energy sharing. Yeah, the elephant in the room. Yeah, it's pretty obvious. It's a very expensive Elephant. I don't know where we're going to do undersea cables for solar and this kind of thing. Yeah, snow. That's an issue. 24. Yeah. Okay. Well, there are places where it's dark. Yeah, I'm not praising the wind farms. Okay, here is this. This is where I just feel like Elon has just rotted everybody's brain because you just see things like this is the cost per kilowatt hour. So first of all, if you're talking about the United States, maybe you see battery prices at 125. In practice, that's going to mean 250. If you're talking about power walls, by the way, at home, you're talking about paying 800 to $1,000. So this person doesn't even know the numbers, and then they have these projections on the numbers. But what do you mean by $70 a kilowatt hour? It's of storage. So if you're talking about the intermittency of solar, you have to multiply the price per kilowatt hour by 24 hours to be 1 day of storage. And if you're talking about solar, which is gone half the day and can be suppressed for days, even a week at a time, you need many, many days of that. So if you have a realistic number, such as $250 a kilowatt hour times 24, you're talking about on the order of $6,000 a day. And then you're talking about, let's say, 5 days. So that's $30,000. Do you know what a natural gas plant cost per kilowatt hour before anti-fossil fuel policies screwed up the supply? $1,000 a kilowatt. So you're talking about $30,000 a kilowatt for solar to make it reliable, because that's what you need in terms of the batteries. And we're not even talking about the overbuild of the panels, which is going to add a lot more to that. We're just talking about the batteries. Yeah, so okay, great, it's 30x. And even if you talk about the fuel cost of the gas, the other things, and you offset that, it's going to cost even more than the fuel of the gas discounted over time than it is to replace the batteries over time. So you just have no idea what you're talking about. But this is the brain rot. We need people, if you're talking about storage and solar, you need to be talking about multi-day life support. And so these numbers are just total nonsense. You cannot say per kilowatt hour. You don't even know what you're talking about. Okay. Uranium. Yes, I like uranium. Let's remove all the obstacles to using it cost effectively. Okay, this person's kind of just translating me. I agree with them. I wrote a book called Fossil Future. I don't know if that's a clown thing. If you read that book has been more right about energy than anyone could have imagined. Even I was surprised by how right it was. I mean, it predicted the AI demand. It said that fossil fuel use would continue to increase. It said that climate catastrophism was wrong and that climate-related disaster deaths would continue to decrease. It highlighted all the problems with government-dictated solar and wind. And by the way, wake up, the whole world, now that we actually have a lot of new electricity demand, is agreeing with me. So yes, I've written the most prophetic energy book in memory. Yes. Well, satellites already do use solar panels. So yeah, in space, it's good. We agree on that if you can do it. Okay. It's clearly an Elon person, full self-driving pilot. Oh, great. Okay, we got a kind of classic anti. I'm Epstein, not Epstein, and yeah, I don't know that guy, and I didn't know that guy, and I'm not good. I don't do anything like that. Where your mom is from if your battery dies. Okay, nobody knows this. All right, let's just see. Is there anything else here? We got a lot of comments. By the way, I said solar is better than wind as a fuel saver, so I'm an even-handed guy. I'm just honest about stuff. The problem with energy is, if you want to be honest about this, here's the problem with energy, the energy thing. It's like, for various reasons, it arguably hasn't attracted, in some cases, the highest IQ people. There are exceptions. But the main issue is that the HQ, the honesty quotient, is just sub-zero. So it's just so bad. It's why it's just so many people have been so wrong about this issue. I mean, my main contribution has just been, hey, let's be even-handed about the benefits and side effects of different technologies. And that was such a breakthrough in this field because we have such a low HQ, and just so many grifters and catastrophists. And I'm trying to fix electricity. I think I helped fix the climate issue, and now we got to fix electricity because electricity is just so much dishonesty. Yes, it's never just wind or solar, the power. Well, It is though, because you have to have capacity. You have to, when you're making a grid, you have to have a certain amount of capacity, which is providing the electricity you need that you can rely upon at a given time with a certain reserve margin. So when you're making capacity, you have to look at solar or wind or anything else as an individual thing that you can rely upon to perform. Now, at any given moment, yeah, it can go offline, it can go off for maintenance, something can break. But when it's in working order, that those things don't need to happen that often. When it's in working order, it needs to reliably perform. So if it doesn't reliably perform, it is not capacity. You cannot rely on it, and therefore you need to pay for real capacity. And therefore, the cost of your solar and wind is the cost of the solar and wind infrastructure plus the reliable capacity, and all you're doing is saving fuel, which is usually not worth it, but it can be worth it. And we should do it in that case, but we should be honest about what it is. Notice, this is a revealing thing. The goal is to make the whole thing as low emission as possible and economically viable. So notice that is what the real goal of this stuff is. And the people in the know that solar and wind are adding cost, but they think it's worth it because they're lowering emissions. Now, they're not usually honest about the full cost they've added, and they're totally dishonest about the replacement potential. But you can make that argument. Make that argument that you're reducing emissions. It's true that if you use less fossil fuel and you use more solar and wind, you're not replacing capacity, but you're reducing emissions. Okay, that's fine. But be honest about that and be honest about the costs. Okay, yes. This Kardashev thing, I mean, solar is doing next to nothing real right now in the world. So what good does it do to talk about like we're going to use all the sunlight for energy? Like, why don't you try to produce some real energy and not collect subsidies on it instead of just having all of these sci-fi stupid fantasies and using things like Kardashev scale that people don't understand, but it makes them feel cool. Like, and if you want to talk about really exciting amounts of energy, let's double down on harnessing the power of the atom via fission and hopefully at some point fusion. Okay, well, your real future is going to be nuclear. SMRs, I assume you mean MMRs, so micro modular reactors. Let's hope so. Let's hope so. There are a lot of obstacles to this, though, but like, let's get the political obstacles out of the way. Hopefully, you can modularize nuclear. It's not that easy. Large scale nuclear has been better so far, but let's get the obstacles out of the way of both and see what we can do. Now, solar is nice because it's modular. It's just not a reliable power source. I wish it were. I keep looking into this stuff and hoping that solar will be reliable. I just keep getting disappointed the more I drill down into this stuff. But I really wish that someone can make this work. So if you figure out how to make it work, do it on a free market and tell me about it, and I will be your biggest fan. Because it is nice how modular solar is and batteries are. Just the economics suck unless, except for certain fuel situation saving situations. Okay, storage prices. I already talked about these numbers. 125 for just the battery, and then it's about 250 for the full thing. Yeah, okay, but you don't get the magnitude here again, because if you're talking about 5 days of solar storage, you're talking about $30,000 a kilowatt, and then if you're talking about the overbuild of the panels, you're talking about 10x. You're talking about well over 10,000 a kilowatt, and natural gas on a free market, you're talking about 1,000 a kilowatt. So, and of course, you got to replace this stuff even faster than you need to replace the natural gas plant. I mean, much faster, and that outweighs the any fuel savings. So, okay, interesting thing about wind versus nuclear. Strategically placed, yeah, at different times of day. I don't know what world you're living in where you think it's easy to just have solar farms strategically placed around the world and just cable everything together. Okay, another just totally ignorant thing. By the way, I notice every time somebody says something nice about solar, it seems to get a lot of stuff. And I noticed before I switched back to my following tab on X, it's just constant solar propaganda. I don't know how transparent X is about the algorithm. Maybe it's just because I see these things and get annoyed and it gives them to me, but I wouldn't be surprised if solar battery propaganda is getting a boost. Yeah, the price is collapsing. What I mean by catastrophic is if you actually, this is just lithium ion battery pack, they just do everything they can to manipulate you. Like, what's the real cost of installing the stuff. What's the real cost of a power wall if you have some residential fantasy? Like, that's going to be around here. But again, you have to multiply it by 24 for a day, and you have to multiply that by 5 for 5 days of multi-day storage, which is, so you're talking about a multiplier of 120. Two least expensive sources of electricity, it's not even disputable. No, you're looking at a cost per kilowatt hour of a reliable source versus, in the case of solar and wind, an unreliable source, which that is an apples to rotten oranges comparison. You have to look at the full cost of delivering reliable electricity, which is almost always higher using solar and wind, except where they have fuel saving value. Fresh, yes. None of these things are self sufficient, the central US. When you are self sufficient, then I will celebrate you. Otherwise, you are a lying parasite, unless you are honest that you're just a fuel saver. Extremely predictable like clockwork. Yeah, let's look at the winter storm, but very modest. How is it very modest? How can it be? How can being gone more than half the time be very modest? What world are we living in here? Okay, this person. Yeah, this person actually knows what they're talking about. I wish the algorithm would give this person a lot more. Okay, I'm at least going to give you a like. Maybe that'll help. It's it's location dependent. Yeah, obviously certain locations are better than others, but it's really hard to find any location that's even good for fuel savings, let alone, I mean, for being an independent power source, no deal. Oh, I didn't clearly think it through. Needs servicing regularly. Okay, solar needs servicing too. You need to clean the panels, you need to scrape snow off them, but you're not addressing the fundamental problem. Peak usages during the day. Yeah, you're not looking. This is a more intelligent one. So you're talking about the peak issue. So yeah, there is some correlation between so the advantage of solar is, particularly in a warm climate, it is its availability somewhat coincides with demand. And what often happens is the effective peak switches a little bit later because the solar starts to disappear at night, and you have this huge problem of reliable demand, and that still takes a lot of batteries. But if you're talking about the key is I mentioned this earlier, if you're thinking about solar and wind as true replacements versus fuel savers, if you're looking at fuel savers, this is a valid point that it allows them to save more fuel if their availability more coincides with peak demand. But if you're looking at them as true replacements, they have to be able to provide capacity. Yeah, they have to be reliable 100% of the time, as in when they are working, they need to actually provide reliable capacity. Otherwise, they need to be replaced by something else. That's the point I keep making here. Okay, this smart meter thing, but this all the smart meter thing and all these phony electricity markets are they're pretending that solar and wind are real capacity, that they have what's called capacity value. That's the whole problem. So if you want to do smart meters and stuff like this, you should give solar and wind, you need to figure out a way to just pay them for the fuel savings. And basically anytime they get paid, the reliable sources need to get paid at the same time because they're providing the reliability that solar and wind totally depends on. Pump storage is often better than batteries, by the way. So, yeah, it works off grid if you can, if your option is really expensive energy or laying a really expensive power line, you don't have that many power demands. Yeah, solar has a use there. So, for sure, solar should be used when cost effective. We just can't be dishonest about when it's cost effective. Doesn't matter with solar fans, it's about what will be. Yeah, I already addressed all this. Tell me when the sun shines 24/7. Then we're going to have a lot more problems with global warming, by the way. The true issue becomes, yeah, this person is very right. Solar and space. I get what you're saying, but okay, I agree with you on this. Yeah, I think solar is better as a fuel saver, which is what you really want. So in that sense, solar is better than wind. It has a lot of other advantages over wind. But if you're actually trying to power your country with the stuff, wind is a lot better. This person is this person is funny. Give him a like for humor. Similar point. Constant sun. So I think the best place in the world is Chile, and that has the equivalent of I think 7.5 hours a day, so a third of the day at peak sunlight. And I think yeah. So I don't know what you're talking about. It's not looking at the full cost. No, Musk is not talking about space. He's just started talking about space recently. He's talking about Earth, and his companies have lobbied for huge subsidies and preferences for solar on Earth. That's the issue. All right, speaking of people who've been wrong about things, Rethink X, I think, takes the cake. But you said when you build solar 2 to 3 times what is needed, this lowers the overall cost. And no, if you're thinking of it as a true replacement, what happens when you overbuild it twice and it's still night? There's still night all the time. What does that solve? So again, you need to build it way more than twice if you're going to charge a lot of batteries with it in a self-sufficient way. So this is all this whole rethink X. These guys, they're just you can just do back of the napkin and see that it's obvious BS. They're what they're all trying to do is they're trying to parasite on reliable power sources, and then they're trying to evade their parasitism, and they're trying to do what I call in fossil future partial cost accounting. So I'm doing real accounting, and I'm holding them to real standards. So either you hold them to real standards, in which case you're talking about 10x overbuild or more, many days of storage, or you're talking about them as a fuel saver, and then be honest that they're just a fuel saver. I guess the person is being a little bit condescending. Yeah, okay, I understand all of this stuff. So this basically translates to solar and wind are still not reliable dispatchable power. In certain circumstances, they may be better for fuel savings. Okay, let's. I didn't even see this one. I because I actually asked Grok with a real query, and it failed. Let's see what it says. Okay, let's put this here. It says it. Let's see what Grok has to say. Because if you give Grok 4 heavy, like I've given all the major AIs these queries, and they're all pretty honest about them actually. So what does it say? How are the economics of solar and battery using? Yeah, yeah. So this is a trash question. That is, so we just know it's going to be stacked to other forms of power because what it's going to do then is it's not going to address this issue of having reliable dispatchable power, which was my whole point. Like, is it actually going to be a replacement for fossil fuel power or nuclear? Like, my point is the cost of doing that for solar is way higher than wind. And then the cost of solar as a fuel saver is cheaper than that of wind, but still not cost effective. But if you do this, what you're going to do is you get this dishonesty where you're treating it as a reliable power source, even though it's not, and catastrophically expensive to make it a reliable power source. You're doing that. But at the same time, you are so you're doing that and then but you're sort of dealing with these fuel saving economics, but then you're ignoring all these other costs that we just know. So okay, levelized cost of energy. I mean, come on, guys. Don't we know levelized cost of energy explicitly says they ignore reliability related considerations? Okay, how much do I have to look at this trash? Oh, great. And if we add the investment tax credit that Elon is lobbied for, then it's even cheaper. Great. Okay, so it's like, what are we talking about? This this is what you came up with that you just wasted my time on. Non-quantitative analysis apparently complete. Look, this person. This is the brain rot that I am so concerned with. It's just nobody think. Just think about it in common sense terms. You need power 24/7, 365. Solar and wind are determined by the weather. The weather cannot give you any amount of power that you want 24/7, 365. Wind can come a lot closer if you overbuild the hell out of it at absolutely catastrophic expense, and then you add storage, so that when it's really underperforming, you have something. At least hypothetically, solar is just much, much worse because you have to overbuild and you have to have way, way more storage. So just don't ignore common sense. You all know, most of you know, like electricity doesn't come from the plug. It needs to be generated in a particular moment to meet the exact amount of demand. So don't allow these charlatans to just make you not use your brain. They're accumulators. Yes, the problem today is storage that will be solved. Well, I hope so, really, really cheaply. Here's the thing, as I point out in Fossil Future, fossil fuels, nuclear, to some extent hydro, geothermal, though it's not that good yet on a large scale, they use natural storage. Natural storage is way, way cheaper than man made storage because nature did all of this work inadvertently, I believe. But anyway, it did all this work, used all this energy to make energy stored in a useful form for us. We didn't have to expend all that energy to store it. If you're making man made storage, you have to expend energy as well as other resources, including time, to do it. If it'll be solved, great. I hope it'll be solved. I hope we have storage 1,000 times cheaper. That'll be great for any number of reasons, but we cannot pretend that it is solved now. I was talking about the present. I wasn't talking about the fantasy future. Oh, there are batteries. Okay, great. So again, you're not grasping the scope of this. I don't know what this freedom thing is. Solar storage is a few. Oh, overbuild. People who I have never met somebody who actually built and operated a power plant who believes any of this propaganda. I just get constant validation from those people. This person is at least acknowledging, yeah, nuclear is key. Yeah, there's a kind of person who's a climate catastrophist who says we need firm power, we need a lot of nuclear, and then we want solar and wind on the margin, and we think it can save fuel. Now, if you just make the nuclear cost effective enough, then you don't need that other stuff. So I would prefer to do it that way. But at least the people, the catastrophists, or let's just say the emissions reduction obsessives, the ones who acknowledge that you need nuclear as the basis of it, I respect that coherence at least. Okay, the moon's equator, great. Midwest, solid overall coverage. Nice to have natural gas. Yeah, this is a read my piece later this week. It's like pretty solid overall coverage. If you're going to freeze to death, you don't want this euphemistic, pretty solid overall coverage. You want it on demand. That's why if you look at the capacity of all the reliable sources in almost everywhere in the US, it almost always or always exceeds the peak demand because they know they can't rely on solar and wind. The problem is that the margin of exceeding peak demand often has gotten lower because of the anti-fossil fuel policies, including the preferences for solar and wind, which, by the way, among other things, screw up the economics of natural gas and coal because whenever solar and wind are there, because of the distorted markets, they get solar and wind collect 100% of whatever they can, even though they're parasitical on the reliable plant. So we need to fix those markets. But the main point is the people actually operating the grid know that you need dispatchable power. And by the way, they've painted, that different entities are painting maps of the country red and orange to show that all these problems that we're having. Peter Diamandis is a nice guy, but man, he's been wrong about this for a long time, and he continues to double down. But he's sort of like the thing about Elon is Elon has earned. I mean, there's a lot of ways, and obviously, in which he hasn't earned trust in terms of rate of lying. It's pretty high, but there are ways in which he has earned trust, including like brilliant innovator and manager and anytime he says something true, I try to highlight it because, in energy at least, because we would like him to be, have a much, is quite a high IQ, that HQ, that honesty quotient, if he can get that thing up, he will be consistently a force for good instead of this crazy, crazy mixture that he is right now. Dyson's. Okay, this is just, you're just using words. Okay, so I've already addressed all the pricing stuff. Address this. Okay, yes, I understand that the sun powers things. That's different than solar panels being good in every situation. I agree. There's a lot of a money component. No, he's not referring to solar in orbit. Oh, I would love to know the cost of this guy's grid. You run the numbers of a really sufficient thing that can handle a winter storm, and you're off the grid. Those that then those numbers get even crazier because you're paying residential prices for whatever 10x overbuild and multi-day storage. Imagine multi-day storage and you're paying $800 a kilowatt hour for a power wall. Yeah, and all the energy. Yeah, no, you don't need all the energy. You need with electricity. You need to be able to match as much demand as people are going to have. So the key thing is can you meet peak demand with your capacity, and then you can talk about will solar help saving fuel. The other thing is if you have uses of power that are truly intermittent, what people call them flexible. Like if you can actually handle solar and wind's intermittency and you're not gonna make any demands on the grid, so you can be self-sufficient and off grid, then if you have economic applications like that where it's truly that non-demanding, that's great. It's just there are not that many of those that we're seeing. So if you can do that though, then great. But don't screw up the grid. Just stay off the grid. Make your own thing. And we should make sure that, by the way, it's easy for them regulatorily to do that. This is not addressing my point. Solar thermal. Yeah, the solar thermal stuff hasn't worked well. It's a solar plus storage thing, but it has some kind of plausibility, but it's worked worse than this other stuff. Yeah, this is just about the scale. I agree with that. Although, like, if you had enough solar and storage, you could power an electric arc furnace. It's just a question of the cost. Yeah, I agree about the unit economics of solar, but still, wind has more performance throughout the day, and that makes it better if you want to be truly self-sufficient. I've been to the Southwest, and I live in Southern California, which is one of the best places for solar. And guess what? Somehow we do not have incredibly cheap electricity prices. But yeah, Southwest is a more plausible case for fuel saving for solar, particularly if you have anti-fossil fuel policies that drive up the cost of gas and infrastructure. But why don't we get rid of those anti-fossil fuel policies and then let's see where we need solar for fuel savings? And look, if we can use it for fuel savings, great, let's do it. Or if you have truly intermittent demand, you want to do off grid, great. I'm in favor of all of those things. Original source of energy of wind. Yes, thank you for explaining where wind comes from. That really addresses my argument. Okay. Yeah, okay, wind is moving parts, yeah, but still doesn't address my point. Okay, this is a new one in a sense. Solar and storage supplied up to one-third of California's evening electricity demand Friday when the sun wasn't shining. Well, no, the sun didn't provide it. The storage provided it, and the storage can be charged by anything reliable. The fact that sometimes the storage can be charged by the sun does not change my basic point. Notice you picked Friday, but here's the problem. You don't just need electricity Friday. You need that Friday, the 13th. You need, assuming that's the Friday you're talking about, you need electricity every day in all sorts of conditions. So the point remains you need electricity 24/7, 365. In order for solar to reliably provide that, you need to massively overbuild it and have multi day battery storage that is catastrophically expensive, on the order of 20 plus times what a natural gas plant costs in a free market. Uh, yeah, you guys are making criticisms of a win. Look, I'm not I'm not an advocate of government dictated wind. But I'm just annoyed with everyone. Is like all the solar people have kind of thrown wind under the bus. Like Elon and Chamath, they're just always talking about Noah Smith. They're just always talking about solar and batteries as like this is the solution. It's just so obviously absurd that like don't throw wind under the bus if you're trying to do it without fossil fuels. I mean, definitely don't throw nuclear under the bus, which they also do. But come on, just use common sense. Do not allow people that you think are smart, that may actually be smart. Like, do not allow them to make you lose your just basic sanity and critical thinking, because either they can be they can have motives that make them dishonest. They can have there's lots of things that go on that can make people who do well on the SATs, who do well on an IQ test, who are good at math, like some people, including me, like do well on these things and are very honest. But other people are not, or they're just their thinking methods are so bad that they haven't thought it through. And there are people kind of in the middle where it's not their field, and you don't really know how honest or dishonest they're being. But anyway, a common sense person, and certainly anyone with any experience with electricity, can just see right through this. So don't allow the perception, like don't ignore HQ, the honesty quotient. That's one of the big lessons right now. Okay, well, China, if you're talking about the cost of nuclear, yeah, I mean, China, they're doing many things right, that we are not doing, including they're trying to build nuclear relatively efficiently. I, Oh, so I'm being dishonest? Elon isn't talking about terrestrial solar power. This is his whole business. This space data center thing is just something he is talking about right now. So, no, I'm in favor of him unsubsidized going into space and trying to make more use of solar in space. Although, probably a lot easier in the scheme of things to just use nuclear because it just has more than a million times the energy density. Oil requires you to find it. Well, that's true. So oil, coal's easy to find. Gas right now is pretty easy to find. I mean, we know where a lot of oil is, but it's true. Oil has that difficulty with it. Sunlight not as hard to find, but is impossible to find during the night. Coupled with the battery is beyond. Okay, we already addressed this. I shouldn't be impatient because obviously these people didn't read all of these comments and hear my responses. $30 a month for a $30,000 roof and inverter installation. Yeah, well, and by the way, most solar and battery owners are many of them are getting screwed over themselves, but they're definitely screwing their neighbors too. Oh, okay. Solar is much improved now. Yeah, it's not the amount. See, this is the 30% of the time, but the issue is if the time is distributed by wind over 24 hours, then you can overbuild it and then you can get more something approximating capacity. Whereas if it's a third of the time, you have to store it the rest of the time, then you have massive, massive storage costs. And then when solar underperforms, as is guaranteed to happen in various circumstances, then you need even more battery storage and even more overbuild. Thank you. Yes, I didn't know that the sun shined in space. Yep, I'll give that one a like. Yep. This is an interesting question of why China's building so much solar. So one thing is they're trying to sell it to the rest of the world. So with China, you have to keep in mind there's just rampant dishonesty. There's rampant corruption, rampant dishonesty, as well as a lack of various restrictions. In many cases, it's good, although in some cases they don't have restrictions that they should have in terms of protecting people's rights. But there's so much going on with China, but the thing you need to notice for the purpose of this example is China continues to increase its reliable capacity. It increases the coal capacity. There's a question of how much solar it is using for fuel saving. So you can think of it as kohler, not solar. It's not an independent thing. But it's also just hard to know the numbers. It's hard to know how much they just subsidized the hell out of the industry and overproduced solar panels, and thus they have them there, and it's better to use them for fuel saving than for nothing sometimes. So we don't fully understand what's happening there. But good question. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Solar. Okay, Denmark has the um some of the highest electricity prices in the world and definitely not self-sufficient. This is a tiny country that can parasite on its neighbors, that can export power when it has an excess, that can import it when it doesn't. So when it's short. So, but yeah, I mean, Denmark is interesting, but it's not at all self-sufficient. So that's notable. And they have extremely, extremely high costs. So I agree Denmark is a useful example. Yeah, if you're off grid and you're using very small amounts and you can manage it, yeah, I can see why you would want solar rather than wind, especially if you're on a small scale. Like, yeah, solar panels have a lot easier scalability down. If you can store your energy for longer, yeah, just nobody's taking seriously what this means in practice to be reliable because everyone is taking advantage of the actually reliable source of energy. Um, I guess you just have to look at our arguments. Geographic limitations. I don't understand how that's going to change unless we're all living just floating around in space. Yeah, North Dakota, you got natural gas. Very good. Nuclear, yeah, nuclear is great. Uh, I don't think so. I don't think that's true. I think it's sometimes true. I would say, interesting factoid, like, the person who said something like this is Peter Thiel, who said that, like, don't bet against Elon. But you don't bet against Elon because he's so capable, in particular as a competitor, and one of his main capabilities, as we all know, is manipulating people and government. So you don't want to compete against him when that's going on. If you want to compete against him in terms of a debate on energy, or the truth on energy, not so hard. And Peter did my book lunch and was asked, would Elon have a conversation? Would Elon have a conversation or debate with me? And he said, well, Elon got to where he is by being very good at predicting what would go well for him, and this would not go well. So, but Elon, you can just be honest. Like, no, I'm very forgiving, by the way, of people who've been maybe as a fault, but I'm very forgiving of people who have been wrong. Like all the people who are calling for net zero and now say they need more gas for data centers, I'm welcoming them into the energy abundance party. And so Elon already has some good ingredients. He's pro-human, he's pro-technology. He just has a lot of honesty problems when it comes to his livelihood. But I believe in free will and he can fix that. Okay. I already addressed that. Fusion, yeah, well, let's doesn't really work economically anywhere right now, but I'm rooting for it. Yeah, good point. Windmill don't doesn't reach break even. Well, it definitely reaches break even in terms of net energy. It just doesn't reach it in terms of net reliable energy because it doesn't really produce any reliable energy. Yeah, storage. I already talked about the magnitude of that. This is very interesting. Yeah, if it's off grid, yeah, I already explained that. I already covered that. I did the math. I need to. No, I gave very good math. So the question is, can anyone refute my math about the overbuild and storage, multi-day storage requirements for solar and storage? That's the key thing. That's the key. I mean, the key takeaway morally is, in terms of observing these things, is the idea of the honesty quotient, the HQ. But in terms of just technically, just that very simple thing of to make solar reliable, what's the scale of overbuild? What's the scale of multi-day storage? Talking mainly semi decent points about advantages solar has over wind, but not addressing the the core point I made. I make my money from fossil fuels. No, I make my money from expressing my views to people who find them interesting. Man, if I turned around and supported these subsidized things, I don't know. There'll probably be a lot of money in it, but actually, I think I make money because of my HQ, my honesty quotient. So if I switch my position with the current facts, I wouldn't have much to go on, and thus I think I would make less money. But I'd make less money by being obviously dishonest versus an issue of the particular technology. Again, I cannot wait. I mean, I can wait. I need to wait, but I wish I could discover something really exciting about solar. I'm excited about batteries, by the way, but I wish I could discover something really exciting about solar. Like if let's say we find some application where the intermittency of solar just works perfectly for an off-grid thing and a lot of our electricity can be funneled into that, great. Or even solar plus batteries, but it's not really self-sufficient. That would be great. And I'm rooting for people to figure that out. Yeah, LCOE fallacy. I agree. A Cybertruck's battery, yeah, Cybertruck's battery is really expensive, and it depends which days and what the use is. And we're not just talking about homes; we're talking about most of our energy use is is industrial to make all of our different stuff and produce all our different services. So when you talk in terms of homes, it's misrepresentative. All right, I think I'm almost done here. I've been going an hour. Yes, I'm in favor of solar in space. Yes, yes, you get a like. No, not as self-sufficient. Self-sufficient, scalable system. That's what we need. Yeah, obviously neither beats natural gas. Yes, it's the original source. Capacity, I already addressed capacity factor. This one is interesting. Yeah, I know where the wind comes from. This is funny. Snake solar companies are an issue, but the nature of the sun and light is the bigger issue. No, he didn't mean it in space. Yeah, this person's pretty good. SMRs, we don't really have any right now, but I hope we get them soon, and I'm working to get rid of all the obstacles. So I'm working to get rid of the obstacles for all of these things, including the case I hope for, where intermittent solar and storage is useful. Uh, Again, this is not true. Yeah, but I'm talking about self-sufficient, not operational cost as a parasitical thing. You say nuclear fill in the rest, but nuclear needs to provide all the capacity. So you need the same amount of nuclear plants as you would need if you had no solar. So the fuel savings have to justify it. Plenty of natural storage methods that work well, not plenty that are cheap and scalable. But if you have some, that's better. That would be great. Okay, okay, okay. Yeah, this is fair. I'm going to give this one a like. Zero have megawatt. So yes, it's true. I mean, it's more often. And if you have a widely distributed area, it is rarely zero. But yeah, batteries we covered. Batteries. Okay. I love how people think this is a thing. So I need to say in everything I say in solar, hey, by the way, I understand that the sun is the root of fossil fuels, and I understand that it's the root of wind. A technical way of not addressing it. This is called effective load carrying capacity. It just doesn't have real capacity. What that means. Well, yeah, Elon has deployed gigawatts. Guess what? When he wants to power Grok, he uses natural gas and violates local laws to do so. Not that I agree with those local laws, but yeah, he in practice he knows what powers things. Yeah, get off the grid and then tell me. Okay, are we almost done? Nuclear and solar, if the solar justifies the fuel savings. Well, no, but you're treating it as real capacity. If you're just treating it as summer peak, which still has problems, then say that. But then that's a very limited situation, location wise, and even in a particular place, because then you have to deal with the winter peak, and you have to admit solar is totally useless for that, and you can give it no capacity value. Okay, haven't seen anything. I keep thinking I'm almost done, but I guess I'm not. I'm just gonna scan this. Real means available on demand, and thus able to replace fossil fuels or nuclear. Okay, so okay, we're getting to more insults here. I wonder if that's the my last name. Okay, it's a good argument. Oh my God, Seba Jacobson will give credit because that guy is so wrong, and even all the catastrophists have proven that like a million times over. But he's actually a nice guy to interact with, which I mean, at least he's had nice interactions with me. But granted, I haven't written another refutation of what he's said. Um, I don't have any reason to be biased. I've tried to create minimal reason, which is definitely different than Seba or Musk or any of these other guys. China disagrees. No, China agrees. They're building more coal capacity. Don't bet against Elon. Not as a political manipulator. I wouldn't go up against him. Although my side did win on the big beautiful bill, so I was able to contribute to cutting a lot of those solar and wind subsidies. But Elon's heart didn't seem to be in it. So yeah, he's very hard to compete with politically. I mean, he's very smart. Look at the people he's hiring and getting to propagandize for him. He's very smart. Is this the insult section? Okay. Tesla's free energy system. I got through it. Okay, guys. Okay, yeah, we're a lot of uses of retarded at the end. So let's wrap up. Just very simple. Hey, let's just look at the original post. But the key thing is if you want something resembling capacity, that is power on demand, which is what we rely on to keep ourselves warm, to keep the lights on, to keep the hospitals on, keep the refrigerators on, like to keep life going, we need this 24/7, 365. In order to provide that level of reliability, which we are depending on every second of every day, you if you want solar or wind to provide that, they are both quite bad because you need to overbuild them. You need to build many more time, so many of them that even a small percentage of their maximum potential, which people call capacity, which is the wrong word, even then it could provide all of demand. And then for the times it falls way below even a tenth of its potential, you need a lot of storage. So wind and solar are both bad, but wind is better from the perspective of providing real capacity because it blows most of the time throughout the day to some extent, whereas solar disappears for more than half the day. And therefore, you guaranteed to need a lot of storage, and because it can underperform for days and even a week, you need multi-day storage in order to keep those batteries charged to meet, to provide power for over half the day. And that's why that in that sense solar is worse, in the sense that wind and solar are actually used, which is as a fuel saver for reliable power sources. They're not reliable power sources, but they can save them fuel, not usually efficiently, but sometimes solar is better for that. So when we're comparing solar and wind to other things, we need to treat them as intermittent fuel savers that add cost to reliable electricity through generation, to the solar panels, the wind turbines, the transmission, the distribution, the batteries. You need to look at them as very expensive or usually very expensive intermittent fuel savers. And the question is, are the fuel savings worth all that expense? Which, by the way, the fuel savings are diminished by the fact that they make natural gas and coal run less efficiently. It's like stop and go traffic. When they go to accommodate the intermittency of solar and wind, when they go up and down, they're less efficient. So you save fuel, but you don't save quite as much as you think. But in any case, that has to be offset by the cost of the solar panels, wind turbines, batteries, transmission. If you're talking about long distance, if you're trying to do residential solar, then good, then your costs of that are going to be three times higher, so you have to deal with that. And that's the basic thing. We can talk about things like fuel costs, which natural gas has, and solar and wind don't. But it turns out that when you properly weigh the cost of the fuel discounted over time, because you're using small amounts of fuel over time, that turns out to be less than it's going to take to replace and do all kinds of other stuff to the solar, wind, and especially batteries that wear out quickly. So we're talking way over 10x the cost, and nobody's doing it as a reliable power source. They are doing it as a fuel saver. Still, most of the time, if you run the analysis, it is a waste of money from a financial perspective. If you can make it better as a fuel saver, great. If you can find real uses for intermittent power, great. Don't burden the grid with that. Prove that. I would love that to happen. Send me if you have good cases, but let's all be honest. So, number one moral lesson is let's try to be people with a high HQ and honesty quotient, and let's look for people who have a high HQ and hopefully a high IQ as well. And I've tried to be that for you today, and I will continue to do that in the future. Thank you very much. This is Alex Epstein. Follow me at Alex Epstein. Read my book, Fossil Future, and go to alexepstein.substack.com for my energy newsletter.